their mic. So let me start by welcoming everyone to this virtual panel entitled A Proposal for Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement between CARICOM and China. The event is being sponsored by the Embassy of Barbados to the People's Republic of China, the University of the West Indies Faculty of Law, the Sridhar Raphael Center, and the Association for Barbados-China Friendship. Again, can I ask the person to please mute their mics as they enter the forum? So my name is Jani Vremi, and I have the honor of being your MC for the evening. When so much else is going on, the fact that you've chosen to spend the next hour and a half or 2 hours with us is indeed a privilege. I am pleased and very proud because the main event for tonight is really the product of work done by students of the law faculty at the Cave Hill campus under the supervision of Dr. Ronnie Yearwood, lecturer in law, and myself, as part of a trade lab network of universities. The network to which the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus now belongs, the first Caribbean university ever to do so, creates pro bono legal clinic and practical opportunities which connect students and experienced legal professionals to public officials, especially in developing countries, small and medium-sized enterprises, and civil society to build lasting capacity. Through learning by doing, TradeLab aims to train and promote the next generation of trade and investment lawyers by pairing students up with beneficiaries in developing countries. For the second time, we at the University of the West Indies led a trade lab clinic with students of the Cave Hill campus law faculty, third-year law students. Tonight, you will hear for a moment one of the three groups of students who signed up to be part of Trade Lab and who over a period of 5 months researched, drafted, redrafted, and redrafted a memorandum that seeks to explore possibilities for a special type of economic and trade partnership between CARICOM and China. When Dr. Yearwood and the study's beneficiary, the government of Barbados, represented by Ambassador Jackman, discussed this project, I'm not sure they quite appreciated the impact that it would have. Students, you have exceeded all of our expectations, and we are very proud of you. I will leave the students to dazzle you with the findings of the memorandum. But let me start with some introductions of the panelists, starting with the stars of the evening, the authors of the memorandum themselves. Sarah Bach, Michaela Darby, Shannon Potter, and Carissa Rudolfo, all former final year students at the law faculty, Cave Hill campus. Again, can I ask everybody join me? It may be that the host will have to do it for person. Yes. So as I was introducing the students who are the drafters of the memo, they are all former final year students at the law faculty Cave Hill campus who are now pursuing their
Excuse me, Jenny, just a second. I'm going to mute everybody, including yourself, and then you can turn your mic back on, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So you can unmute.
Okay. Thank you very much. So yes, for the third time, because they need to be introduced 3 times now, I was just introducing the students who are the authors of the memo, and I'll call them again. Sarah Bach, Michaela DeBarcy, Shannon Porter, Carissa Rudolfo, who were all final year students at the law faculty Cave Hill campus when they drafted the memo. But they are now pursuing certificates in legal education at the Hugh Wooding Law School, as well as the Norman Manley Law School. in Trinidad and Jamaica, respectively. Just to give a little bit of a background of the students, Sarah is a Trinidadian holder of a BSc in International Relations and Sociology before she started her degree at the law faculty, and is passionate, she says, about international law. Michaela, also a Trinidadian, during her time at Cave Hill, held many leadership positions and discovered her passion in IP and trade law. Shannon, the only Antiguan in the group, has a previous degree in accounting and law, and held many leadership positions while she was at Cave Hill, including at the Law Society and at Frank Worrell Residence Hall. And Carissa was awarded an open campus school for academic and extracurricular activity for excellence. And she says she's fascinated by international economic law as well as tax law. So besides the students, we are also going to be regaled by other speakers tonight who will actually discuss the content of the report, being led by the moderator for tonight. And I will present these speakers in alphabetical order. Their full bios are contained in the program for this event, so I will just be very brief in the introduction. First, we have Dr. Antonio Aline, who also served as a mentor to the students in preparing the report. He has a PhD in economics, international trade from Dongbei University of Finance and Economics in China. He currently is at the University of the West Indies Economics Department. We also have Dr. Chelston Brathwaite, who served as Barbados' second resident ambassador to the People's Republic of China from 2014 to 2017. We have Rashid Griffith, who works at Kelman PLLC, a boutique law firm based in New York, whose core focus is in the fintech industry. He has served in his previous capacities as a director of Caribbean Asian Council based in Manila, the Philippines, as well as a research fellow of Future and a public policy think tank based in Cambodia. Let me also welcome His Excellency Francois Jackman who is Barbados' ambassador currently to the People's Republic of China and the beneficiary of the students' memorandum. He's the former co-director of the Confucius Institute at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. Let me also welcome Mr. Eric Orlando, who's a journalist with more than 30 years of experience reporting, producing, and managing newsrooms for some of the world's leading editorial organizations. And he, at the end of the presentations, will be presenting a very special program that he's hoping to pursue, and we will wait with bated breath to hear about that. And finally, but by no means least, Dr. Delisle Worrell, who is a member of the Financial Policy Council of the Bermuda Monetary Authority, a member of the Bretton Woods Committee, and president of the Association for Barbados-China Friendship. He formerly served as the governor of the Central Bank of Barbados. So we have quite an interesting and exciting set of panelists, and we're really looking forward to hearing from them. So let me now ask the presenters of the report, who are actually the authors, to unmute their mics and actually, over the next 20 minutes, present the highlights of the report that they drafted. All four of the authors will present using a PowerPoint presentation. And so let me turn the mic over to Shannon, who will share her screen. Thank you.
Hey, hello to everyone. I need to be enabled to share the screen by the host, Dr. Worrell.
All right. Check whether you can do that now.
No, it's still saying that you have to disable participant screen sharing.
There you go.
Okay. I can do it.
Got
now.
it?
Yes.
Good.
So everyone can just let me know if they can see the screen, the PowerPoint presentation. Yes? Okay, great. So I'm going to put it on full screen. Okay. So this is a proposal for comprehensive economic and trade agreement between CARICOM and China. So just to give an overview of the project, CARICOM and China have a trading relationship, but the literature on this relationship is sparse. This relationship should be documented to guide the future relations between the parties to understand its shortcomings and consequently improve such relations. Thus, this project is focused on analyzing the economic relationship between the parties with the aim of creating a comprehensive economic and trade agreement, also known as the CETA. So, throughout the course of the presentation, we'll be taking you through the parties' trade objectives, the CARICOM China trade and economic relationship, China's agreements with comparative states, the CETA and its specialized clauses, political considerations and risks, and then we'll be giving you our conclusions based on our findings. So very briefly, the trade objectives between the two parties, CARICOM and China, we would have looked at the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas and also the strategic plan for the Caribbean community that was published in 2014, and also the white paper for Latin America and the Caribbean that the Chinese government would have published in 2016. And we found some of the areas of overlap that the two parties have when engaging in trade relationships were one, the values that they operated by, namely mutual support, mutually beneficial cooperation, equality, and mutual learning. We also found social welfare to be another area of overlap, with China focusing on poverty reduction, with the elderly, disabled, and children being of particular concern, along with disaster mitigation. With regards to CARICOM, building regional pride and improving the quality of life of its people by advancing initiatives for health and wellness and by enhancing citizen security was a focus. As it relates to disaster management, we know that China has a history of having natural disasters like floods, typhoons, and also famines. And we know that in the Caribbean region, we are hurricane prone. And then the final area of overlap that I'll touch on is the maintenance of natural resources and environmental protection. So this is of particular importance to CARICOM member states that are rich in natural resources like Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Jamaica.
So, as we began our analysis, our initial standpoint was a substantive economic analysis with regards to the current trading, economic, and investment agreements between CARICOM states and China, such as double taxation treaties, the bilateral investment treaties, and the Belt and Road Initiative. We must make this small disclaimer that our data and subsequent deductions emerging therefrom were based on a pre-COVID-19 assessment. And the central trend which we had found in the relationship between the two parties appears to be that their dealings are predominantly through loans and grant funding. However, it is contended that there's also the existence of a high trade potential between the parties. So as we start to look at the formalized agreements, we see that China currently has 3 double taxation agreements with CARICOM states, and these are namely Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. And when we looked at these tax treaties, we found that the jurisdiction to tax was primarily on a generic basis. So the state which offered the economic opportunity is afforded the right to tax the relevant revenue, and also that taxation rights between CARICOM and China are being shared equally. So these treaties demonstrate low tax advantages, which would make the Caribbean the ideal region for international business for China to conduct operations, and therefore the Caribbean provides a favorable pathway into China via tax treaties with and the minimal taxation frameworks that are in place could be for offshore entities. So we believe that it will allow businesses to reduce their taxation burdens while simultaneously repatriating their earnings to China. And lastly, we have put forward the recommendation for a CARICOM double taxation treaty, which also requires further research.
Currently, China has signed bilateral investment treaties with 5 CARICOM member states, And generally, these bids contain similar provisions, but there are some key distinctions. So, for example, the Barbados, China, and China, Jamaica bids do not have the protections of national treatment, nor do they have the prohibition of arbitrary and discriminatory treatment. Secondly, the Barbados, China bid does not have the full protection and security standard, and the Guyana, China, and Trinidad and Tobago, China bids have umbrella clauses. Now, we recognize that bids are valuable to CARICOM because they do give easier and better access to China's market, as well as they guarantee protection for CARICOM investors in China. Now, ideally, the China, Guyana, and China, Trinidad and Tobago bids are actually best to model the investment chapter after, of course, minus the umbrella clauses, because they do contain all of the protections, as well as they do not have a prohibition of performance requirements clause. Thus, however, we do propose some adjustments, such as a specialized version of the FET clause, which would allow for a narrowing of the interpretation of breaches. We propose the use of performance requirements in particular the construction and energy sectors, and the national treatment exceptions in sectors important to the local economy, which are all included in the specialized clauses and will be explained further by my colleague, Michaela.
So in continuing our economic analysis, we found that CARICOM and China are natural trading partners because their trading structures and economies can be considered complementary. And we also reiterate that the Chinese investment in the region has been predominantly through loans and infrastructural development projects. And this showcases China's economic development model, whereby they create the economic opportunity in the state, which tends to be a substantive advantage and benefit to China. So therefore, we had to look at the implications of these projects within the Caribbean. And the first would be as it relates to Caribbean debt. And we found that many CARICOM states have a substantial debt to China, namely Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Suriname. And if unchecked, China's expanding engagement in the region risks leaving a series of economic white elephants, leaving the region an insurmountable debt. States like Suriname have expressed its fears that mounting debt to China can have the impact of stalling future development and exposing the country to liabilities above its ability to repay. Secondly, we also looked at the terms of the agreements, particularly as it relates to waivers. Though investment project agreements between CARICOM states and China were difficult to find, the ones that we did in fact discover showed terms to the effect of compromising state property should a specific loan or project not be repaid. Thus, there's potential for risking state sovereignty if these agreements are not properly crafted. And lastly, we looked at the impact on local living. And we saw that employment opportunities emerging from these Chinese investment projects tend to be significantly isolated to Chinese nationals. Additionally, there have been situations where the investment projects have been detrimental to the livelihood of locals. Therefore, there is a constant debate as to who really benefits from these type of agreements. Now, moving forward to our trade findings, we found a very wide range of findings, which I will now go through. Firstly, CARICOM's trade with China is on the increase. However, it is overwhelmingly in China's favor, and the data shows that imports from China are steadily increasing. One reason for this could be the rise of e-commerce within the region and its ability to facilitate more flexible importation from China. However, the trade deficit between the states remains apparent and continuous. Additionally, CARICOM's top 10 exports are predominantly raw materials, while CARICOM's top 10 imported products from China are finished manufactured products. So this indicates that there may be existing opportunities in the Chinese market that are underexploited by CARICOM entrepreneurs, and that Chinese products may also be competing with local businesses. Additionally, the research has demonstrated that CARICOM continues to register a trade deficit with its trading partners, except for the EU, Notably, though, the trade deficit with China is not extremely high. Therefore, once there is effective intervention through trade liberalization of more CARICOM sectors, it is possible to achieve a trade surplus. Additionally, the data also illustrated that the US exists as CARICOM's central trading partner, and that trading between CARICOM and China is still incredibly sparse, as mentioned prior by my colleague. This may be evidence of the long history of trading between the US and CARICOM, such as the Caribbean Basin Initiative. Therefore, in order to diversify its trading operations, CARICOM needs to look past what is familiar in terms of history and culture and delve into developmental sectors of mutual interest in order to expand its economic relationship with China. And lastly, we saw that China is slowly increasing in significance for import markets when compared to our traditional partners. However, as imports from China are increasing, imports from traditional partners are not decreasing. Chinese imports, therefore, do not seem to be displacing those from the US or the EU, but total imports are still increasing with China. Therefore, more active engagement needs to be done in various sectors to improve growth between the region and China. So, having taken all this into consideration, from an economic standpoint, we had to consider what was the underlying objective that we wanted our CETA to promote. And for China, for their benefit, we focused on productivity efficiency. So most of China's economic arrangements with states highlight their ambitions for productive efficiency. And productive efficiency occurs where the economy is utilizing all of its resources efficiently by producing goods and services at a minimum average cost. And on the side of CARICOM, we focus on dynamic efficiency. An enhanced trading partnership with China would be vital for this, because dynamic efficiency is concerned with how well a market delivers innovation and technological progress, as well as responds to quick economic changing in circumstances. So dynamic efficiency leads to lower costs, new products, and improved goods. And this is particularly important for CARICOM, as our markets are particularly volatile and often experience different kinds of shocks.
So we looked at, with regards to trade liberalization within CARICOM, we would have looked at the minutes of the trade policy review body meetings of CARICOM in 2014, 2015, 2017, and 2019, and found that the areas that we should focus on are financial services, foreign direct investment, intellectual property, mining, telecommunications, and tourism. We also would have looked at some of the main exports within CARICOM and found that they were commonly refined petroleum, crude petroleum, gold, rice, raw sugar, liquor, beer, orthopedic appliances, and aluminum. With regards to China's third-party economic relations, we would have compared 3 comparative states against 4 states within CARICOM, the 3 comparative states being Costa Rica, Iceland, and Mauritius, against Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. The reason why we chose these comparative states was because of the similarity in population sizes. So like Mauritius and Trinidad, the population size is almost equal. Same for Barbados and Iceland, the population sizes between those 2 states are almost equivalent. All the countries chosen for this comparison have refined petroleum and cars as their top exports, and the US is a top export destination of all the comparative states as well. So with regards to the FTAs that China has with the 3 comparative states, we found that for Costa Rica, that China's exports to Costa Rica are far higher than Costa Rica's exports to China, and that China does benefit a lot more from the trade relationship between the 2 countries, despite the commitment to reduce barriers to trade. However, from our research, we found that the true effect of the agreement cannot be assessed until after 2025, when the FTA comes into full effect. With regards to Mauritius, the FTA, there is too new for us to have made any conclusions as to the effect of the FTA. And then with regards to Iceland, we saw that Iceland has seen an increase in exports to China, while China's exports to Iceland have remained stable. The FTA, while being beneficial to Iceland, has not done much to increase China's exports. We also looked at the bilateral investment treaties between Iceland and China and Iceland and Mauritius. We found that the similarities between them were the provisions for MFN treatment, fair and equitable treatment, full protection and security, guarantees against expropriation, protection from strife, the umbrella clauses, and dispute settlement clauses. We found the main differences to be in the China-Iceland bit at Articles 2, 6, and 8. Article 2 outlines that the parties are to provide nationals of the other contracting party with the facilities for obtaining visas and work permits in connection with investment-related activities. Article 6 is a provision that provides for the review of expropriated investments by the participating governments. And Article 8 provides that an arbitration tribunal, if there's a dispute with relation to the treaty, is to give reasons for their decisions. So based on that, the conclusion that we came to was that the China-Iceland bit includes more protections than the Mauritius-China bit, and is thus the preferable template to draft the investment chapter of the CETA.
So, following the analysis of the relationship between CARICOM and China, their respective interests and trade objectives promulgated by my colleagues, it was found that the best form for an agreement between the parties was a comprehensive economic and trade agreement. This is a new form of international agreement which seeks to enhance economic and trading relationships between states by combining aspects of traditional free trade, economic sustainability, and investment agreements into a cohesive international agreement which promotes sustainable trade. Moreover, from our analysis of the two parties, it was determined that the following markets, which can be seen on the next slide, should be further explored within the CETA, these being construction, e-commerce, energy, financial services, and of course tourism, which for many CARICOM nations is the main and in some cases only forex earner. Furthermore, the chapter discussing the CETA also examines some clauses, both general and specialized, which we believe should be included in the agreement. However, in the interest of time, I'm just going to highlight a few of the specialized clauses. So firstly, we put forth a clause on preferential treatment and tariff concessions, which utilizes China's duty-free, quota-free market scheme. This is a scheme which grants a zero tariff rate for goods originating from least developed countries which have relations with China. Though we recognize that no CARICOM nation is categorized as least developed, there have been instances in which this has been applied to non-LDCs. As well, we believe that it could be modified or an exception be made for the CARICOM region. Then there is the guarantee of fair and equitable treatment and full protection security. As previously mentioned by Sarah, this will narrow the scope of the agreement and is a particular safeguard for CARICOM nations who are more likely to violate it due to inadequacies in infrastructure. Naturally, there is a reservation and exception clause, which is particularly in respect to MFN, national treatment, and other investor guarantees for the protection of certain economic sectors. We then suggested a competition law clause, which would subject both parties to CSME competition law. Also put forth was a clause on the right to regulate, which allows for the right to derogate in the interest of pursuing legitimate aims without requiring compensation to foreign investors. As was previously mentioned by Carissa, a double taxation clause, which specifically references a double taxation treaty between CARICOM and China, which we suggest be created in order to ensure cohesion of taxation rights between all CARICOM territories and China. As there is a clause on tariff concessions, we also propose a tariff adjustment clause, particularly for the benefit of the lesser developed CARICOM nations, as this would allow for the alteration of trade and investment provisions to enhance the economic viability. And lastly, we recommend special assistance with disaster relief and emergency suspensory clauses, as we recognize the geographical position of the region, coupled with its inadequate infrastructures, leaves it vulnerable to natural disasters. while also recognizing the wealth of China. We believe that these clauses would help prevent the agreement from being frustrated and to maintain its economic viability.
We assessed the political considerations and possible risks and firstly looked at the United States of America. Now, there may be retaliation by the US government in the form of denying CARICOM states development assistance, reducing trade with the region, and possibly preventing foreign direct investment from American investors because of the US's traditional dominance in the region and its distrust of China's objectives in the region. Conversely, CARICOM's increased relations with China may actually reignite the US's interest in the region, as was seen with the establishment of the United States International Development Finance Corporation, which was created in response to China's Belt and Road Initiative. So this tug of war may actually be in the best interest of CARICOM states, but it does require a delicate balance so as to not completely isolate one benefactor state. We also looked at Taiwan, and we are all aware of the One China policy. Naturally, this has implications for the success of the CETA, as 6 CARICOM states recognize Taiwan. And a CARICOM China CETA requires the commitment of all CARICOM states. However, we suggested that perhaps states that do recognize Taiwan enter into reservations so that the provisions of the agreement do not apply to them and they get to maintain the diplomatic relations with Taiwan whilst not hampering the success of such an agreement for the wider CARICOM community. Looking at other risks, CARICOM top 10 exports are raw materials, and this could lead to a depletion of natural resources if harnessed unsustainably. This depletion can decrease avenues to generate revenue for CARICOM nations because they do not have many options for goods that are not tied to the natural resources or land. Furthermore, CARICOM states are quite susceptible to the effects of climate change, so the potential environmental damage because of unsustainable harnessing of the natural resources could worsen such effects. Another consideration is because of the differences in CARICOM states, they will derive different benefits, perhaps even disproportionately. Now, CARICOM states are not the same in size, in population, in natural resources, and so they may not all have the same level of economic opportunity. This could lead to tension between CARICOM states who may see other states deriving more benefit from the CETA than them. But as mentioned by my colleague Michaela, we do propose a mitigatory measure of using Article 4 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas to guide the treatment of CARICOM states in their respective obligations. Another risk posed is the conditions that come with China's economic development assistance. We are aware that China generally insists on the use of Chinese labor in their projects. However, as previously mentioned, a possible solution for this could be performance requirements. In closing, we would like to thank Ambassador Jackman, Dr. Yearwood, and Dr. Remy for the opportunity to work on this project. And we are honored that it could serve as a frame for the discussion at hand tonight. We look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, students. You all make us proud, and let me just acknowledge that Dr. Yearwood, who is the supervisor of this project, is now on the call, and I share the pride with him. I'm very sure whenever we hear the students present on this, they of course got very good marks, and I know that all of the sweat and tears we put them through as well with it, as I'm sure the panelists will, when they pour over the findings, will recognize that quite a lot of thought and a balanced review, if I may say so myself, and quite a lot of maturity in thinking from the economic to the political to the legal went into this almost 100-page report. I will share the link to the full report for those who have the stomach to go through all of the pages, but it's well worth the read. So after the students have provided these thoughts, it just leaves me now to hand over to the moderator of the Q&A with the panelists, Dr. Worrell, who I will now invite to engage the panelists with some thought-provoking questions on the report. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jean-Yves. And let me echo your sentiments with respect to the report, and to congratulate and thank the talented young ladies who have just presented it. I think it is an impressive and comprehensive survey of the literature, so to speak, on this important topic. I think it also is practical in the sense that it brings out the challenges uh, uh, in terms of what must be done to enhance the Caribbean's benefit from the relationship with China. So I want to frame the conversation this evening, not in terms of the specifics of the report, but in terms of the wider conversation on how we can enhance the benefit that the Caribbean derives from the relationship with China in all its economic dimensions. And I want to start the conversation, and I'm going to invite the members of the panel to unmute their mics because I'm going to be directing my questions to them with the whole question of investment. I think in the popular mind, the possibilities of getting additional finance for development from China and for projects that we are that are priority for us in our own development is uppermost in the minds of most people when they look to the benefits that we may get from China. But when we look at the what has actually happened and the extent of Chinese financing in the Caribbean region, the question is, it seems quite insignificant proportion of our total financing. So I'm going to start with you, Francois. Barbados has had relationships with China, diplomatic relations for 42 odd years now. When you look at the extent to which there has been financing for China for projects in Barbados, isn't it strange that we have so little? And wouldn't you say that it is not consistent with what you would have expected from a relationship of this duration?
Well, thank you for the question, Delisle. And before I attempt to say a few things in response to the question, I'd like to add my voice to yours and that of Janive to congratulate again the authors of this report, which is really, I think, a stellar accomplishment. And to be honest, it is one of the very few pieces of work, along with Dr. Aline's doctoral dissertation, that focuses on the question of the trade relationship, the commercial relationship, the economic relationship between the Caribbean and China in a kind of systematic and analytical way. And that is, in fact, part of the problem which your question points to, which is, by and large, we have not been able so far to develop within the Caribbean region, within the institutions in which we customarily develop these frameworks, we have not been able to develop an intellectual, policy, an academic framework within which to think through, analyze, and act on the different elements of our relationship, so that we are left, and my predecessor and former boss, Ambassador Brathwaite, would have experienced this himself directly, we are left in a way staring into an abyss where we don't really know exactly what we're looking at. We don't have really the tools to measure in quantitative terms what is going on in terms of investment or trade. And so our ability to analyze what's going on now and shape the future of what we want from this relationship is limited. And that's where reports, analyses, and studies like this have a tremendous role to play. Specifically in response to your question, I think the answer is yes. Given the amount of overall foreign direct investment into Barbados, given the amount of overall development, cooperation, financing that has come into Barbados from our traditional partners, the proportion of China's support in this regard is actually relatively small. And this is not a criticism of China's role. It's merely a statement of a fact which is connected to our long history of relations, for example, with our traditional partners in North America and Western Europe, and the shorter duration of the stronger part of our relationship with China. And so there is a lot here in our relationship with China, investment, trade, development finance, to be built on. Right now in Barbados, as far as I know, and I think there are a couple of friends who will probably know better than me who are participating here, there's only one major Chinese-based investment going on in Barbados. It's quite big, it's Sandler's Castle, but it's only one. So there is no doubt in my mind that in a market like Barbados, but more broadly speaking, the Caribbean, there's room for more. In fact, there's an appetite for more. The question, of course, as always, is the conditions. And some of the conditions, finding the right balance among these conditions, are the issues that the students' report points to. And lastly, if I may, and I'm delighted to see that we're joined by a number of people from outside of the usual orbit of our discussions, there's a great deal that we can learn from the experience of other regions. You mentioned Eric Olander. I think Hannah Ryder, who runs a consultancy in Beijing called Development Reimagined, that works on China-Africa relations. We have a lot we can learn from China's relationship with other regions, Africa, the Pacific, Latin America, because there's no need to reinvent the wheel. We have examples of things that went well and things that didn't go so well, and we can draw on this experience to improve and enhance our own relationship. So there's really a lot of room for development here, and reports like this, discussions like ours today, are ways of helping us find that room and move into it.
So let me move to follow on that to Antonio to take a bit of an economic perspective on it. And my question to you, Antonio, is that sort of scarcity of investment the result of inadequate legal and a legal framework and arrangements, or is it rather driven by the economics? The fact that there perhaps are that we have, adequate financing from traditional sources for all the viable projects that we have in the region, and that the Chinese are quite happy and willing to invest, as I would expect they always are, in projects which offer a reasonable, competitive rate of return. But those projects that are of a scale to be of interest to Chinese construction firms, for example, are really in short supply in the region. What is your take on that perspective?
Okay, good evening, everyone. First, again, let me congratulate young ladies for a job well done. I think it was an excellent document. And to answer Jenny's question, I did read the entire 90-page document, so I found it very interesting. In relation to your question, I think there's two sides to that. From the legal perspective, as well as the economic perspective, not too clear at the legal component as it is, but what I can say is that what have been left out was that over the years of negotiation that we've had with China, my research data also indicated to me that there was a lack in for us to drive forward the initiative as well, because the initial agreements.
Your mic you've turned off your mic inadvertently.
Oh, my apologies. I was indicating that the relationship that we've had, the region has had with China, has been slow paced. It is only now that I think that we recognize the importance of diversifying away from our traditional partners that we found interest in actually taking up some of the investment options of our Chinese partners and other partners across the world. As it relates to the trade and the investment perspective per se, I think that's more on the economics of things. We are challenged by a cost factor, as you would all would know. So it's not a case where we can seek to compete on the market as it relates to price. So for us, it's more about having that specialty item that we can offer, whether it is a service or whether it's a product that we can offer the Chinese market. That would obviously boost our contribution to the trade relationship. But that being said, it has to come from, even though policies may be in place, the reality is that it has to come from the business individual. So businesses have lacked the impetus to go beyond the norm, I would say. As mentioned in the document, is the Canadian market, the European market, as well as the US market. And when it comes to investment, particularly, I do support what Francois said. A lot of this comes from the unusual conditionalities that are set in place for these, as it relates to these investments. It is a case, in my opinion, where it is just a matter of, it is not the norm or what we would generally would expect in terms of givebacks or what we call conditions for the monies being allowed and so on. Now, that being said, as of late, if you look at over the history of time, the 42 years since 1978 or so, you see that there is somewhat of a pickup or an increase in the level of operations between the region and the Chinese market. So there is some sort of advancement going on, but I think it's at a very slow pace. I think that the business community lacks the impetus to want to get involved within that foreign market. As well as you said, there is investment opportunities here, but in the grand scheme of things, our investments are, I dare say, small. So we have to make it has to be somewhat of attractive to the Chinese market, because if you look at the size of their investment across other nations, there is a clear indication that our investment opportunities, even though the returns may be high, the limits of what to invest in are small. So I will leave it there for now, and then we can get into other discussions later.
Right. So let me pass the baton to Chelston. I'm trying to get the question onto a sort of a down to earth kind of situation. Are there specific things, projects that we can think of now or in the recent past that did not go forward for lack of finance, where we might have benefited from access to finance from China? And are there areas that are crying out for finance now in which we aren't able to secure finance from traditional sources that might be open to China? What are the prospects? What are the things that we have missed? Chelston.
Thank you very much, Delisle, and I would like to say good evening to all. This has been a fascinating forum so far. I would like to congratulate the university and the leaders of this initiative and the students for their contribution to what I see as a very important um, potential for the creation of a new chapter of China CARICOM cooperation. In a real sense, what we are doing here this evening is seeking to define a way forward that could be captured not only in terms of investment finance, but what could be captured in terms of a regional response. China sees the Caribbean as one region. In fact, China sees Latin America and the Caribbean as one region. And one of the challenges that we have had in terms of seeking to engage China is defining who we are, what our needs are, and what are the things that we can do together. In fact, when the president of China, the Honorable Xi Jinping, came to the Caribbean in 2013, he promised the Caribbean $3 billion in investment. As far as I know, that $3 billion is probably still available. Some of it, I assume, has been drawn down. But I would imagine that a significant part of that financial resource is still available. But Delisle, before getting into the reality of this, I would like to make two comments with respect to the study. I think it's a remarkable piece of work. And again, I would like to congratulate the students and the leaders for the excellent job that they have done. I have noticed that soon there will be a seminar or webinar on trade between the Caribbean and Europe. And I hope that we can get some of the experiences, some of the challenges, and some of the positives from that study to influence and to affect development and continuation development of this proposal. One point in paragraph 95 of the document, the fact, and I quote, the fact that China bilateral trade agreements with Latin American countries in and around the Caribbean region have proven to be unsuccessful due to the lack of trade complementarity between the contracting parties should not be overlooked. Now, I take issue with that statement at paragraph 95 with all due respect, because a significant free trade agreement in this region has occurred of which we have not apparently taken note. In November of 2005, Chile became the first country of Latin America to sign a free trade agreement with China. That agreement resulted in the export of copper, paper, fish meal, timber, wine, marine algae, and fruits to China. The agreement was so successful, with a worth of $17.4 billion, that the Chinese have now renewed the agreement in March of 2019 to include trade and services, including legal and financial services. And that agreement has resulted in two products that I will mention. There are many of them, but two products I will mention. Wine. Chile is now the number 3 supplier of wine to the whole Chinese market. Number 3. The first being France, Australia, then Chile. And fruits. Chile is the number 1 exporter of fruits to the Chinese market, with a value, as I indicated, of an agreement that is worth $17.4 billion. And just recently, the Chinese have agreed to establish a bank in Chile. The basis of the bank is that it will facilitate trade using the yuan and the Chinese and the Chilean currency as currencies for the exchange of trade. Now, this is an important development in the context of what we're talking about, because are we going to be in a position where we have to look for US dollars to continue to buy Chinese products? Will we be able to trade in the one which has now become part of the basket of currencies of the International Monetary Fund? These are important considerations, and of course, we have to deal with the question of Taiwan. And I'm not going to go into that because that is a deeper discussion. When we talk about CARICOM, can we form an agreement between China and CARICOM, given the fact that several of our countries are still in strategic and diplomatic relations with Taiwan? But let me go back to your question. Are there opportunities for Chinese investment and for relationship that is more profound? The Belt and Road Initiative, which the Chinese have extended now to all regions, is a framework for exploring investment opportunities with China. And given our need for infrastructure, given our needs for example, a simple example, a regional transport system, to move goods in the Caribbean, not by LIAT, but by having a system that can move agricultural produce from Suriname, from Guyana to Barbados, from Jamaica, etc., is a fundamental area for investment. And if we're talking about the Belt and Road, we're talking about transportation, we're talking about infrastructure. These are some of the areas that merit consideration. But we have to put our house in order. The Chinese have done their part. They have expressed their interest in helping. What we have not done, in my view, we have not come up with viable strategic regional projects that they can finance. And I go further with respect to the point made by Dr. Antonia Allen, the economics, etc. We need to study Chinese law. As I studied the document and I read it completely, it's an excellent proposal. There is need for an understanding of Chinese trade law. It is not sufficient to understand the CSME and the aspects of CARICOM law without studying trade law. And I have always made the point that we do not seem to have any Caribbean people who are studying Chinese law. I will leave it at that for now, Delilah, and sure there'll be other comments going forward. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thanks very much, Justin. So, Rashid, I'm going to put two questions to you. Since the conversation has broadened beyond the investment one, what, in your view, are the main areas in which the Caribbean has benefited from the relationship with China and stands to benefit from that relationship in the future? Is it investment? Is it exports? Is it imports? Is it bilateral trade agreements, etc.? And secondly, what is the balance in terms of the access to those benefits between the economic motivation, the availability of projects that are available for investment, which are viable and which have a competitive rate of return? What is the balance in terms of the productivity and competitiveness of exports and imports from which we can benefit? The economic case for these things, as opposed to the benefit that may be derived from a trade treaty.
Thank you for the questions. So, fundamentally, the greatest benefit that Barbados and other CARICOM countries have had from China is the imports. And I think that's very underappreciated when you're having these discussions. For example, when you're going to think about how Barbados or any other country has particular revenue, the government has revenue has to spend on imports. If you can get imports at a dramatically cheaper cost than, let's say, some other substitute, then the money you save on those imports, that opportunity cost can be reallocated to other parts of the economy. So we have a much more wider view of what imports mean. You realize that the actual real benefit we get in the Caribbean is that. And that's not a benefit that is a political benefit or a trade treaty benefit. All the other CARICOM countries are even, for example, have relations with Taiwan. They have the same benefit. They also import all their goods origin-wise from China. Unfortunately, one of the problems which you've identified before and other in economic mindset is that when you look at the data on trade, inwards into the Caribbean, it is from China. It is sparse. It is almost trivial. But the problem is that, for example, like the cup I'm drinking from is it's all made in China. Everything around is made in China. The problem is that when you look at the actual objects, everything actually is already imported from China. What happens is you have a indirect vehicle called the US or Panama, which we do an indirect import from. So the actual data is something to actually present that information. But in reality, the benefit we get really is that import. However, there are obviously ways to expand that benefit. I in services, for example, sort of financial services, banking services, uh, a while ago, just maybe 2 years, I think, 2 years ago, the current Prime Minister of Barbados mentioned that she wanted Barbados to become a, a beachfront market for Chinese investment into Latin America, into North America. Yeah, I mean, that's a good idea, but you don't put any actual motion towards it, then it can't materialize. So I think the actual benefits right now is pretty much material import cost reduction, which is very much underappreciated. And one benefit going forward is how we can advance our financial services. Obviously, that requires some more expertise domestically. That requires some better training. That requires some more um, appreciation towards having more developed financial markets, sorry, financial laws. But obviously, domestically also, the way how our even basic things like our arbitration systems and court systems function, those things have become a lot more efficient to actually expand on this potential of turning Barbados or either other CARICOM countries into a really big market for finance. I think one of the things that people don't realize is that, for example, Cayman Islands is the third largest FDI contributor to China. Of course, this may sound odd. The reason is because Chinese companies use Cayman Islands because of their expertise and their optimization of legal frameworks to optimize their own domestic competition. So the money is properly transferred to Cayman Islands, and the Cayman Islands also where, for example, all the large Chinese companies that are in the U.S. capital markets, they're all based in Cayman Islands. So it's things like these that can actually move forward. If our current offshore sector, which is pretty much very idle, could be developed in a way to properly take on the different service niches from China and also parts of Asia uh, as a directionality into the North American markets.
So, in terms of what can be done to enhance those possibilities, what policies would you suggest would be priority?
Well, priority number one would have to be examination of how, for example, financial vehicles are structured in Barbados. Right now, we have a limited legal framework for these things. Those are things that have to be established first on. The actual ways we actually, for example, treat capital is also very limited. We've not had to develop our markets for quite a long time. Our Barbados stock exchange is actually, very underdeveloped. That's only what we have. So part one is having actually more complex financial vehicle laws developed in the country, and also develop, for example, our capital market laws that would actually obviously work jointly to develop that kind of sector.
So, cycling back to Francois, a couple of things that have been raised in the first round of questions relate to um, the what one might call the facilitation of trade and transactions. For example, through the trading in different in currencies outside of the well, the payments arrangements, let us put it that way, so that as Rashid mentioned, we consume most of what we consume of the products we consume in the region that are actually made in China are not imported from China. They're imported from Panama, from the United States, and from elsewhere. So isn't there mileage to be made in actually, uh, you know, focusing on ways to make that connection more direct? And also, most of our, all of our imports really are priced when we see them in US dollars. And even when we're buying things from China, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have access directly to renminbi. We use US dollars and purchase the goods in China. So, isn't there a case to be made for creating, uh, more direct transaction links? And for example, Chinese banks to encourage Chinese banks to set up operations in the region.
Oh, absolutely, there is a case to be made, and there are even already in existence a certain number of tools. Ambassador Brathwaite mentioned that when Xi Jinping visited the Caribbean in 2013, he announced a certain number of facilities for funding that would be made available. I think he's quite right. I suspect, and again, this is part of the problem, we don't know exactly. I suspect those funds have not been exhausted, specifically with regard to banking and currency issues. And here I'm tiptoeing into areas which others here have far more expertise than I do. But for example, between the Caribbean Development Bank and the People's Bank of China and the Bank of China, there have been discussions regarding the extension of lines of credit from Chinese financial institutions to the Caribbean through the CDB, as well as discussions between the CDB and I think it's the China Development Bank regarding the making available of Chinese currency for the purchase of Chinese products, thus cutting out the US dollar from the transaction and presumably therefore lowering the costs. So these discussions have started, but to be candid about it, for neither side is this considered to be at present, so far, the highest of priorities. For China, the Caribbean is a very small, very distant market, which is not that well known. And for the Caribbean, China remains, though increasingly important, remains somewhat outside of our normal sphere of thinking. We think about the rest of the world, frankly, and you have said this yourself, Dr. Worrell, we think about the rest of the world in terms of the North Atlantic universe, North America, Western Europe, and perhaps the Caribbean and parts of Latin America. So really, this comes down ultimately, I think, to, on our side, grabbing hold of our own agency, identifying specific areas where there is value added to be had, and discussing the specifics with our Chinese partners. Invariably, you will find that in our Chinese counterparts, there is an interest, a willingness to consider the possibility, but often they don't know that much about how to go forward as well. And so we have together to, frankly, to drill down on certain specifics with much more determination and vigor than we have so far. And this is where I think our regional institutions in the Caribbean have a critical role to play, connecting the university to counterparts in China, connecting our financial institutions to counterparts in China, connecting our, for example, disaster and emergency management agency in the Caribbean to its counterparts in China. All of these important institutional linkages are there in theory. We have talked about them. We have, in certain cases, even signed MOUs, but we haven't taken the next step to actually do the work involved in bringing the relationship into life in practical terms, whether it's on the financial and economic side or on the people-to-people academic scientific side. the relationship between the University of the West Indies and the China University of Political Science and Law is an example of where they have been able to take the next steps and do something specific. And this has produced tremendous benefits certainly for Barbados and the Caribbean. But we have to find more tools, more institutional connections, which will allow this relationship to go beyond the general to the specific.
So can I ask you to follow up on that a little bit? Because it would seem that the most effective way to do that is to use existing institutions. Now, you did mention the CDB, but what puzzles me a little bit is that most of the things that we use in daily use that are made in China come to us through commercial channels, right? And the reason we use those things is that they are better value for money. As many of you know, there's a paper that I've written, it's on my website, delileworld.com, in which I have estimated that the 5 largest countries in the Caribbean have actually been able individually to import between 6% and 10%, varying on the country, more goods because of, it's a very rough estimate, because of they were able to buy more affordable products from China than they would have if they had been forced to buy those products from the United States and other countries where they would have had to pay more for those same products, right? So I'm saying that there is a benefit that we have derived because of the commercial imperative. Why is it that these same importers don't see the value of reducing the transaction costs and the transportation costs through developing, through their own institutions, the bankers associations and so on, the networks and access to allow for that direct link?
Well, I'm sure there are several aspects
and
to this question.
Just 1 second before you start, let me remind our audience that we're inviting you to join the conversation through the chat. So if you go to the chat and list your questions, in a little while, Janive will give you an opportunity. Janive will pose them to the panel. Sorry, Francois.
No, not at all. In fact, I will keep my answer very brief because I know that in the audience there are a number of people who probably have better answers than I do. I think one of the fundamental issues here for us in the Caribbean is that despite the fact that for many of our countries we've had 4 or 5 decades of relations with China, the present configuration of our relationship with China, or rather the fact that China has become such an important or potentially important partner for us, is something that hasn't yet fully fed into our policy making structures or into the commercial private sector thinking in the region. So that, and this is not a criticism. This is simply a fact. So, for example, a Barbadian, I'm hypothesizing here, but a Barbadian or a Trinidadian importer has a long-standing relationship with their guy in Miami or in New York or maybe now in Panama. They don't have this relationship with their guy in China. And they're right, because before you have these kinds of relationships, you need to develop trust, you need to know the market, you need to understand who you're dealing with. So I think the lacunae that you are pointing to is a function of the relative newness of this phase of our relationship with China, as well as the physical cultural and linguistic distances that still separates us. So that it's not there in the minds of our private sector that China is a logical next place to go to to export a product or to import a product. Now, I'm simplifying here, but I think this question of knowledge and understanding on both sides is fundamental is a fundamental hurdle that we are only now slowly starting to get over.
Thank you. So, Antonio, so you are in a good position, I think, to offer a further informed comment on that. And in fact, what Francois says sort of gives you an agenda, really, because you have that experience in China to help to sensitize the local community to the opportunities that there might be through more direct contact and building these kinds of transactions, platforms.
Okay. Well, let me add to what Francois was saying just now. As he indicated, the lack of interest or lack of knowledge, I would say not necessarily interest at this point, is more of the lack of knowledge as it relates to how to transact goods between the Caribbean as well as to China or from China. So I think that there's a lack of knowledge there in terms of what we need, what businesses need to do, what they must do in terms of getting more goods into China. Our main interest would be to get goods into China. And there are opportunities there. I can tell you from a perspective of individual walking around China and experienced many years in China, there are opportunities for us and our goods there. And it's not a matter where you have to compete on price. It's just getting the goods to the location. I think that's a big concern. To pick up from what the former Ambassador Charleston Bradford said, the legal component, I think there is a lack of knowledge in terms of the legal components for us here in the region and understanding what is required to get these items into China. That is one aspect. Now, I want to back up a bit in terms of your comment, Dila, regarding the cost savings that could occur through different forms or different mediums of payment. Now, I can tell you here in the region, we've been investigating the group at the Caribbean Settlement Network has been investigating the whole concept of digital payments. Now, from my experience in China, and Francois can support me as well as Charleston, that in China, you suddenly use cash, right? So if we're looking into that form of payment, why is it now that we're not investigating or connecting with the Chinese economy in terms of how we can do business with them using that form of payment? That does not require us to go through the SWIFT system to pay for the US, to use their currency, anything of the sort. And even if we want to take baby steps, there is the issue of, well, it's not an issue, it's now become an open environment where the Chinese dollar has now become an international currency. Has the central bank given, or the central banks across the region, given any thought to storing some of this Chinese currency to utilize for future payments in terms of for transactions for importers and exporters? So there are a number of avenues from which we can take as it relates to these this form of payment and not having and reducing our cost, because as the report indicated, production in the region is not the most efficient, and it could never be for various reasons, simply with lack of what do you call them, economies of scale. Now, as I said, so we have to find alternate ways to reduce our costs, and the avenue you mentioned of finding alternative means of payment is a very good option, but I think we have to take greater steps. We are taking a lot of baby steps now. We're not taking the necessary risks. We're not getting the players involved. If we want to communicate with China, we need to get greater insight in terms of what their practices are, what their legal situation is, and how we can smoothly transition our goods from one location or from our location into theirs and from their location into ours. Either way, one is gaining revenue, the other one is reducing costs, because there's no reason we should be going through the United States or Western countries Latin American countries to purchase a Chinese product. This is a global environment, and every country is connected in some form or fashion. I travel to China every year, and there's no obstacles for me to have to go through one particular country. So if you as a person can transition from or travel from one country to the next, why is it that good? What is so difficult about getting goods there? It is more of a matter of border issues, border costs, and so on, border legal implications, and so on. And all that requires is for us here in the region to have that knowledge and understand what is required of us, what is asked of us in as to get these items into these markets. And I find that that is actually a substantial cost for the region. So if we can circumvent that, as you indicated, these are some of the avenues we can take. You have digital forms of payment, utilization of the Chinese currency from an international standpoint. I mean, there are avenues. Why are we not taking them up? We must ask ourselves that. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And Rashid is something of an expert on the digital space. So I'm going to ask him to offer a comment on the possibilities there. And then I'm going to, after he speaks, to ask Chelston to give a comment on what items and services he thinks have the greatest possibility for improving our exports and sales to China. And then I'm going to hand it over to Janive because there are some questions coming from our audience. Rashid.
Thank you. I think one of the things that has come like a very topical conversational is the idea of digital payments and digital payment clearing, currency, and so forth. But in some ways, it's a bit odd, right? Because right now, we do all of our trade using digital payment. We don't ship a barrel of dollars across the ocean to America. It's all done digitally by transfer systems. So having some separate kind of clearing system in the Caribbean, it's not impact at all. However, the thing about RMB, it is actually would be useful for Barbados, and I mean when I say Barbados, same company with any other Caribbean country, to have a way to do clearing in RMB. For example, I'm very familiar, for example, with the systems in Cambodia. And over the last 2 years, the central bank there has been developing different currency swap arrangements with domestic Chinese banks. So, for example, domestic Cambodian firms, when they do export and import from China, they can settle their transactions in RMB. And they do that mostly because they reduce currency risk. The same company Caribbean. When you have an RMB clearing system, it means that you can actually not go through the spread, for example, between two currency pairs get reduced, because you don't got to go through a vehicle currency like the US dollar. And for example, if you do have a way to do RMB, one of the good things also what we call so-called panda bonds, RMB denominated bonds. Right now, those so very big, let's say, cultural trait now, cultural policy trait now in Chinese policy circles to kind of promote the idea of panda bonds. The AWB trying to get that more popular as well. So RMB is not just, for example, some good way to pay for goods for imports, although it would be a very good way to actually pay for imports. Mr. Jackman mentioned that the guy say you have a store here in Barbados and you have a guy in Panama or a guy in America. But the thing is that your guy in Panama has a guy in China. That's how that works. So the guy in Panama still has to pay the guy in China in RMB. Remember, I sat down in British not too long ago talking about one of these same guys in Panama that does the import-export from China to the Caribbean. And he has problems all the time getting proper RMB payments, but obviously he gets payments from the USD on our side. So there are some ways to actually that will reduce his cost, which filter down into our actual cost savings as well. So there are lots of actual benefits from doing RMB settlement in the Caribbean.
Thank you, Chelston. Do you want to?
Yeah, thank you.
comment on possibilities for accessing the Chinese market with specific products?
Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. I wanted to mention that operationally, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But what we have to do is to look at successful models that have worked. I'll give you one example. The Mexicans and the Chinese do a thriving business. I don't have the number for that business between Mexico and China, but they have a joint chamber of commerce. The Chamber of Commerce in Mexico and the Chamber of Commerce in China have a joint relationship. They have meetings every year. They have a Mexican based in China whose responsibility it is to facilitate the workings of the Joint Chamber of Commerce between Mexico and China. The South Pacific Islands have an office in Beijing for facilitating trade between the South Pacific Islands and China, based in Beijing. Let us not fool ourselves. It is not going to be easy to sit down in Bridgetown or in Port of Spain or in Kingston and do effective trading with China. We have to look for the mechanisms that can work. And unless we put trade commissioners in our embassies, we will not achieve the objectives that we seek, even if we sign a CARICOM China agreement. We have got to put in place the mechanisms to make things happen. And so we have failed to put trade commissioners in our embassies. An ambassador has a responsibility that has to do with more government-to-government relationship, managing the political discourse and the international relations, looking after the diaspora, etc. It is not his responsibility, nor does he have the time to work on trade issues. And so other countries have seen the necessity to put trade commissioners in their embassies to do the business of trading. And that is one of the things that we have failed to do in terms of our own relationship and our whole concept of what an embassy is. When I was there was a proposal to set up a Caribbean Trade and Information Center in Beijing to respond to the reality of the Caribbean and to seek to look for opportunities for Caribbean products entering into China. It did not go very far because we discussed it with Caribbean Export, and I must admit at that time they indicated to us that they could not use EU money to finance an initiative in China, but that's another matter. The fact of the matter is you have to be on the ground in China to do effective business. Why aren't we selling our rum in China? We have an excellent product. Remy Contro is doing something, but their efforts, in my view, are limited. There is an excellent market for Caribbean rum in China. Cuba has been selling their product there, and other countries have been selling their products there, but we could do a better job of selling our rum in China than we currently do, and it's a premium product that the Chinese would love. There are other initiatives that can be used, but I think we have to put the mechanisms in place to make it happen.
Thank you very much. So, Jani, I'm afraid I've stolen about 10 minutes of your time. Can you take over now and pose the questions that we're seeing in the chat?
Thank you so much. That was an excellent session, and hopefully it gives us a great segue into some of the questions bubbling up from the chat. So thank you, Delilah, and to the panelists for leading us off. I'll probably try and get us through over the next maybe 8 to 10 minutes with some of the questions. I think some of them may have been answered in the discussion ensuing, but let me just give them some venting. The first one was from David Bulbulia, who is the head now, the co-lead at the Confucius Center, and he asked the question, where is the breakdown in basic project development originating? I guess the project developments we hear that go awry in certain countries. And is it that Chinese loans are too easy to get? Is it that borrowing governments are not doing their due diligence? He mentioned that some preliminary work contained an analysis for Chinese-funded projects, but ultimately, where does the blame lie when these sort of development projects go awry? And I will ask a couple of questions and maybe suggest persons who may want to take that. Maybe for that first question, I would throw that out to either Ambassador Jackman or Dr. Brathwaite. The next question is really about, it's from Annie and Shu. And I think this was a question that was broached in some answers already, but her question is a comprehensive analysis, has it been done, of why there is a lack of interest from the Caribbean private sector for increasing trade with China? Is it that we have a problem with some supply or demand? What are the challenges? Is it due to traditional and cultural difference or languages? Ultimately, I think the point is it boils down to the private sector interest. So as much as you can design these wonderful trade arrangements, how is it that you're going to get the private sector involved? And just a slight little personal anecdote here. I have a cousin who is a very, very aggressive businessman from the Caribbean, and he took himself and literally went to China and set up a factory there. And even with the transport costs of going through Miami, the cost of importing, and I think this was a point Dr. Worrell was making before, even with the added distance compared to more traditional markets and the the Byzantine way of getting the products to market in the Caribbean, the costs overall were still cheaper than traditional markets. So the question is, when the business community is interested, they find ways of making it happen. So the question is, why don't we have more business people doing that sort of entry into China and vice versa, China into the Caribbean? And that question, maybe I'll ask Rashid and Antonio to think about that a little bit. The next question is from Victoria Miller, and the question there is, have we really thought about shipping and airlift to create more direct links to China? And for that one, I'll throw that back again to Ambassador Jackman and Chelston. I'm giving you all the questions in advance so you can kind of sit with you a little bit. And then I think I'll leave the question from Hannah Ryder to the students when they wrap up in their closing remarks, which is, as much as this is an excellent report, she would like to know what would be the next steps that they would like to see for this report, and is there further analysis that we could undertake coming out of that report? And just a comment made by Ronnie, Dr. Yearwood, who said that yes, there has been thought maybe about using Cayman and other islands in the Caribbean similarly as has been done in the Cayman as financial vehicles for Chinese investment. I know Ronnie has written on this, but we need to be mindful of EU economic substance requirements with respect to whether or not these would pass muster. And then I think I'm missing one or two that may have come in. I know that, for instance, Helen Zamora talked about, and she's written on this language as being really crucial to sustain these trade links. And what kind of work can we do in fostering these kinds of relationships? And I'll leave that question for any of the panelists to sort of develop as they answer the questions that I've thrown to them. I know some of our panelists have to leave. I know Carissa, for instance, has privately signaled to me that she has to leave.
And Francois has had to leave as well.
So if we can get kind of like, I will ask each of the panelists to address these issues in the next, each of them not more than 2 to 3 minutes, and then I will pass it on to the authors to give some closing remarks. So let me start with perhaps former Ambassador Brathwaite. Maybe you can take the floor because I don't think Ambassador Jackman is here anymore.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I would like to start off by saying that part of the challenge that we face in treating with the private sector and getting the private sector to understand China is to recognize that China is a country of 1.4 billion people. It's large geographically, large by population, and there are many markets. When I was there and we started to talk, for example, to one private sector person about the possibility of exporting rum to China, the person said to me, "Oh, that market is too big. We could never supply that market." And I think that implicit in that reply is a lack of understanding of the nature of China. China is several markets. There is no one market. We talk about the Chinese market as if it was a homogeneous entity. It is not. There's Chengdu, there's Shanghai, there's Beijing, there's Suzhou, there's Tianjin. And we could take any of those small cities and begin to promote our product in a small city, and with time it will grow. Tianjin alone is 7 million people. That's bigger than the whole Caribbean, and that's only one little city in the north. Hong Kong in the south, Guangzhou, Xiamen, Fuzhou. In other words, we don't have to try to cover the Chinese market. What we have to do is to identify niche areas with niche products and try to get these into the marketplace. Of course, you have to understand the regulations and the rules and all that kind of thing. One of the things that we have not discussed this evening, I'm sure it will come up at a certain point in time, is intellectual property. And this is one of the things that we have to take into consideration when we are talking about export the Chinese market, the whole question of intellectual property, trademarks, etc. But the point I must make is that the private sector must see in China a number of markets. And they must not get the impression, as someone also said to me, China is too far. Well, it's 8,000 miles from Barbados, but Chile, that has been doing excellent, or has an excellent relationship with China, has been doing great things in selling their fruits and their salmon and their copper, etc., to China, is 12,000 miles from China. So it is not that far. It can be done. What is necessary is a new attitude, a new understanding of China, and a new understanding of the place of China in the world. And that requires education, information, and a new sense of the world and the global environment. Clearly, there are traditional contacts, there are traditional channels, and some of our private sector may be comfortable with those traditional channels and those traditional contacts. But the time will come when they will discover that new contacts with China may in fact be cheaper, as you have indicated, Chair.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Can I ask either Antonio or Rashid to sum up in a couple of minutes and conclude, taking any of the questions I had? Let's start with you, Rashid.
Okay. Yeah, so very tight time constraint. So I would say briefly. I think fundamentally one has to start from the position that the Caribbean itself is a non-starter when it comes to talking about trade with China. We've been talking about this country with China or that country with China, and that's good. That's important. You can't. It's not really good comparison. So the idea of having a CARICOM on the Caribbean trade position with China already to me kind of pretty much non-starters the actual conversation. If you talk about how different Caribbean countries, how themselves actually perform their own trade policies, how they would go and maximize their relationship with China, then that's where you have the conversation properly started. In terms of private sector, so yeah, private sector does drive how we do the economics. There is some benefit for having facilitation done by government involvement, but I think that's actually very minimal. So even from the sense of having, for example, let's say formal trading arrangements, formal trading, let's say associations to in both countries back and forth. At best, that's a knowledge providing fact, but it is a very deep information asymmetry that comes between Chinese firms and Western firms and Caribbean firms. But it is fundamentally a commercial and private sector endeavor. And if, for example, private sector persons locally can actually gain more insight into Chinese market, I think that's a good thing. However, I'm still not actually sure how lacking it is, given that, again, the actual real benefit comes from imports, and almost everyone already imports almost everything from China. So I'm not sure exactly what the actual lack is. But that's another conversation. Language, language is definitely a problem. A lot of Chinese that do the actual manufacturing, the exporting, they don't speak English. And a lot of the actual trade facilitation, if you're in Yiwu or Hong Kong, is people that have very good bilingual skills. And in the Caribbean, there are also quite a dearth of those skills around the place. So enhancing that will actually benefit again. But again, that's a very important that private sector has to really kind of drive that forward by themselves. And as to echo what Dr. Brathwaite said, there is also an issue of thinking about China trade, as China was a big C. I always tend to think about it as there's no such thing as China when it comes to economics, because different provinces, different sectors, they actually behave very differently. And things for example, business culture, how you conduct a business meeting in Guangzhou is very different from Beijing, it's very different from Sichuan. So the actual on-the-ground understanding for these things has to be much more disaggregated going forward when we develop these kind of conversations.
Thank you so much, Rashid. And I'm just very, very cognizant of the time, so I don't mean to cut anybody short, but just trying to move us through. So Antonia, you have the last word, and then we'll take it actually to Eric Orlando before we close off with the students.
Okay, John, thank you very much. I'll definitely make this as quick as possible. First, let me say that in relation to some of Rashid's comments, let's just say I sit on the other side of the fence when it comes to my viewpoint, because from my interaction with Chinese and so on, a number of Chinese actually, I dare say almost now the majority of Chinese speaks some form of English. And when it comes to business, many of them do speak English. Or there's no barrier to communication. They say to a point where business cannot transact. So that being said, but in my main point here really is to get at the Jan's question in terms of how we can get the private sector more interested. I think that's a matter of fear on the private sector's part. How we eliminate this fear is through education. Share not only just what can happen, but some of these success stories of individuals. You just mentioned your family member who can be used as a success story, and there are more individuals like that across the Caribbean who've actually moved towards operations or business transaction on the commercial side with China and have seen success. So, I mean, I think it's more of a case where we need to share more of that information and get businesses more, have a feel good sense of the possibilities there. This is actual tangible evidence that something can happen. Now, we can ramble on and on about the number of things to take, but I think the main point really is to alleviate that fear for the private sector, because they're the ones who will be driving the investment, who will be doing the importing and exporting and so on. And my final point, from an economic perspective, diversity in markets actually helps stability of any economy. So I think what businesses can not only just focus on China, move away from or expand beyond, let me use those words, expand beyond our traditional markets, US, UK, China, Canada, we will see greater stability within the economy as we face a number of these external shocks that we currently face so often. And that's my 2 cents.
Thank you so much to the panelists. We didn't get to all the questions, I'm sorry, but I think we kind of got to the gist of most of them. Let me now, before I give the students the parting words, turn to Eric Orlando, who's patiently been waiting to tell us about an exciting China-Africa project that I guess he's involved in. Any opportunity to expand that to the Caribbean? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but can you tell us a little bit about?
Yes. Well, so what it is for us, and I'll quickly bring it up for you. And first of all, let's see. Are you seeing my screen there?
No, not yet.
Not yet? Okay. Well, I won't waste too much time with the screen sharing.
Maybe we can share it on the website.
There we go.
Oh, there.
Okay. Okay, I think you guys should be, nope. Oh, well, okay. So anyway, let me...
Yes, we can see it. We can see it.
Okay, good. So the reason why Ambassador Jackman asked me to come to join today is because one of the key points that Ambassador Jackman's passionate about is that, again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The challenges that CARICOM countries are going through are very similar to what's happening today in Africa. And there are key lessons that can be taken from the African experience. And what we do at the China-Africa Project is we go through it in detail every single day on aid, on trade, on loans, on all the key issues that have been addressed today in this wonderful discussion and the excellent presentation prepared by the students. A lot of countries have already done this. And so one of the things I'd like to do, and Ambassador Jackman, who's an old friend of mine, asked me to come, is to really introduce you to what we're doing at the China-Africa Project, because some of these challenges that are being questioned today have already been are being dissected. And there's a lot of work in the Africa space that's doing it. My good friend Hannah Ryder, who's also on the call, she looks at these things every day. Javon's Minto, who's also on the call as well. 2 very quick points before we go, just to give you some insights from the African experience. Whatever you do with the Chinese, number 1, transparency is very, very important. And transparency is critical both on the Chinese side, but also on the host government side. You have the power through your national legislatures to make the loan contracts open to inspection and to be transparent so you don't lose the faith of your own people. One of the biggest problems in Africa now is that there's high levels of distrust of their own governments and of the Chinese because of the lack of transparency. So I'll put that out there. And number 2 is to really take the time to look at other case studies and learn from the experiences of others. Ambassador Jackman said that you don't have to start from zero. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I hope that you'll take some moments to come over and see what we're doing at the China-Africa Project. Again, just to inspire you as to what's going on in other parts of the world. So I'll keep it very, very short today, just because I know everybody wants to get on with their evening. But I wanted to thank you and congratulate you on a wonderful session.
Eric, I'm so sorry that we couldn't hear more from you, but what we do have is the website. If you could just type it into the chat function, and I'm sure Delisle after this will maybe add it to the website. It would be an excellent tool because we do have initiatives, even coming from the university, of looking at China and China's exploits in other parts of the world. And this is just a wonderful tool to add and get some ideas for moving forward with the relationship and maybe working with you to figure out how we can do something similar in the Caribbean or building efforts similar to what you're doing. So that's really, and I think by your interventions, you answered one of the questions I think that David had, which is how do we make sure that, these development projects don't, suffer from some of the fates that we see other regions and other countries, notoriously suffering from. I like the point about transparency. So really excellent parting remarks.
Just let me say thanks to endorse what Jan says and to assure you that we will be following up and hopefully we can build a relationship on a continuing basis.
Excellent. So thank you so much. Yes, and Rashid endorses it. So our panelist endorses it. Students, ex-students, Shannon, Sarah, and I know Carissa is not there, but Michaela is still there. So anything that you wanted to remark on as we close? I did throw out a question from one of our audience members who asked, well, what are we actually going to do with this project? So I'm going to leave you to kind of in the next 5 minutes, just give your parting thoughts, and then I'll close. Shanna, did you want to start? I don't know if you guys have an arrangement.
I can start, it's fine. Yeah, so generally there are excellent contributions made by everyone, and I think very valid points were made in that we do need to be innovative in the opportunities that we propose to China. So for example, given that China is now pushing to be renewable energy champions and announcing that they're aiming to be carbon neutral by 2050, this could be a possible, avenue or sector for Chinese investment. But I do agree, and I guess this would contribute to answering Ms. Ryder's question, that a Chinese lens needs to be applied to this project so that we gather more information on, their laws, their needs and their practices, whatever sectors they're interested in, to properly chart a way forward. Further homework does have to be done. This discussion has definitely shown that. But I guess the ultimate hope is really that our research spurs something concrete. And, although I'm not definitely sure on what form that may take, because I do understand there are a lot of moving parts, discussions like this are still a step forward. So, just in closing, I would like to thank you guys for this opportunity and allowing our paper, again, to frame your discussion. Have a good night.
Excellent. Anybody else? Shannon or Michaela?
Yeah, so good night to everyone again, or good morning, depending on where you are. I would just like to close by saying that I totally agree with the comments of Dr. Brathwaite, that it is up to us as CARICOM to really define who we are and what our needs are. Remember that when we were looking at the paper initially, that was one of the things that we really struggled with. Like, what does CARICOM want out of a trade relationship with China? It's not something that is explicitly defined anywhere, and so we were left to discern that from the treaty and from the strategic plan that was published. So that was really something that resonated with me that he said. I also agree with the other point, one of the other points that Dr. Brathwaite had made in relation to CARICOM just coming up with viable regional projects for China to invest in. It really doesn't make sense to ask for investment without having a concrete plan as to what it is that you want out of it. So I definitely agree with those comments. Just in relation to the entire project, it was difficult, a great experience nonetheless. I enjoyed my time with Dr. Yearwood and Dr. Remy and the three ladies. And I would just like to thank Trade Lab, Ambassador Jackman, everyone who was here, and Dr. Worrell for really, planning this whole event and bringing us all here. It was a wonderful opportunity. Thank you all.
Hi, good night again, everyone. Like what Shannon and Sarah said, I just want to start off by thanking everyone for the opportunity to be part of this discussion. Dr. Rami, Dr. Yearwood for letting us be part of Trade Lab, Dr. Worrell for having this discussion, all the panelists. And I really just kind of wanted to echo what Ambassador Jackman was saying about how we do have these institutions and we do have relationships with these institutions in China, but how there is a need to kind of develop it further in order for it to become more meaningful and have a more meaningful impact on the region. And as Dr. Brathwaite was mentioning, and I think what we had echoed in the paper, is that we do have products and we do have these premium products that we can import, but we don't really import it to China, and that needs to be that relationship needs to be further developed so that we can benefit from it. And just on a whole, that whole development of the relationship further with China, I just thought that was a really, really important point. And as Sarah mentioned, like viewing it from a Chinese lens and viewing it and that point of view, and not just how all of our relationships previous have been more of a Western kind of view, and it does need to change a little bit if we want to meaningfully develop with China. And yes, I think that's all I wanted to add. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. All that is left for me to do on behalf of Dr. Yearwood, co-supervisor of Trade Lab, is that this could not have been a better use of our time in dedicating the Trade Lab project to this very important relationship between CARICOM and China. And we really are happy that the sponsors and hosts, the ABCF, was able to pluck the report and bring it to life and start the conversation continue a very important conversation between where CARICOM and China goes in developing the relationship. I heard from excellent panelists. Thank you very much for all of your thoughts and all of your reactions to the report, but also, as Dr. Worrell said, to expand beyond what the students wrote and start thinking about meaningful ways of trying to advance the relationship in a way that is mutually beneficial to both sides of the pond. The recording from this discussion will be available on the ABCF /bb.com website, as well as on the Facebook pages of the Barbados Embassy to the PRC, the Chinese Embassy to Barbados, the Chinese Association of Barbados, and the Returning Students Association. So let me thank the panelists, the students, as well as, of course, this wonderful audience for signing in up until 10 o'clock when I know it's a very busy night and it's late. Those of you who are not in Barbados and in other parts of the world, thank you for joining us. On behalf of myself, Dr. Worrell,
And if I may,
let Dr. Worrell close the session.
To have the last word, simply to thank you, Jenny, for doing such a wonderful job in keeping us managing the entire session, and to sincerely thank everyone who has joined us tonight. It has been really a wonderful occasion. I think that we hopefully have started a conversation which will continue and which, if we are all focused on the outcomes, I'm sure will have positive outcomes for the region and for the way forward. Rest assured that the association will continue to pursue the objectives that we have discussed this evening. Thank you all so very much. Good morning, good night, good day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.